Okay, I hope that works. This is my very first time recording an own session, and I hope it works, including the slides. So let me try and share the slides that I have prepared for this. So if it all works nice, you should now be able to see Insu, whom I had the opportunity to take this nice photograph 19 years ago in Vienna. And that was a SOLworld conference, my third or fourth conference at the time. And it was the first one where I presented a model of mine, which I came to call CoreFu, the core fractal unit of viable systems. So that's my connection between fractals and Vienna. And there's another connection, and that's in the title, because as solutionists, you all know scaling as an activity to support clients orienting themselves with respect to their confidence or their progress on a scale from 0 to 10, or for some from 1 to 10, minus from 0 to 10. Where are you now, and how would you know that you're one scaling point up, etc.? This is one version of scaling. The other version of understanding the word scale or scaling means to investigate into something from different orders of magnitude. And scaling invariance means that you see a similar pattern across orders of magnitude. And that has really fascinated me for a long time. So to use the first order of scaling, first identify your current future perfect. What is important to you, and have an idea of what you would like to see a little bit more perfect in the future. And if you want, feel free to write a headline or a buzzword or something about your own topic or your future perfect in the chat. I will not look at the chat at this point in time, but I'd love to read in it afterwards, and you can read from each other if you want to share anything about what is your future perfect, your current hope, your current best hope about. And once you found that, you can check out if you scale on a scale of progress or emergence of this future perfect, where are you now? 10 would mean your future perfect has already arrived fully. 0 means nothing of that has yet happened. Where are you on your subjective scale of emergence of this topic, your best hope, your future perfect? And once you know that, suppose you were one scaling point higher up on the scale, then how would you know? What would be different if you were one scaling point higher up? And take 20 seconds to just experience what comes as an answer to your imagining you were one scaling point higher up. And maybe as a last scaling part in this idea of solution-focused scaling, how about your confidence that your future perfect will happen, or you will get to some good enough for then point in the future towards your best hope? How high is your confidence? And suppose you could increase your confidence by one scaling point. How would you know your confidence has moved up 1 point of the scale? And just take another 20 seconds to experience what comes as an internal answer, applying scaling in that way towards progress and towards increases in confidence about progress. And once you set your own sort of current frame of reference with the help of a future perfect, best hope, and 2 kinds of scaling, now we're off to the idea of fractals. Let me introduce what I mean by fractals. Fractals originally was a mathematical term, applying some kind of mathematics to create patterns. And this is one well-known pattern called the Sierpinski triangle, which has this fractal quality that I will try to explain a little bit further in a minute. This is where the triangles repeat in shape, in tiny detail, and then in a larger triangle, and then in a larger triangle. So it's triangles and triangles all over the place. The pattern repeats across orders of magnitude. That is the other version of understanding the word scaling. The pattern scales across orders of magnitude. Maybe the most famous fractal pattern is called the Mandelbrot set, named after the inventor of this term, fractal geometry, Benoit Mandelbrot. And you can see top left this figure that looks like a sticky apple with a spiky tip. And if you look down right, you see the spiky tip repeat again. And it's only by zooming into the pattern more and more, decreasing the order of magnitude, and the pattern repeats, and it repeats, and it repeats. And there's a certain beauty in that, which you also find in nature. So if you do this operation of adding rectangles to a rectangle to rectangles ever smaller, what you get is something that looks like a fern. And nature seems to operate on those fractal principles. Here, what you do is you have a square and you have a triangle, and you repeat the square on top of the triangle, both sides, and the square and the triangle, etc. And what you get is a tree. You've already seen how to generate a fern. Grass grows like that. There seems to be a fractal quality out in nature, and it's no straight lines. There is no straight one-dimensional or two-dimensional. All those border lines are sort of rough, not straight, which may be responsible for the beauty. When things get too straight, we lose the context. So it's simplexity, a term that I learned from Jenny Clark when she proposed, well, we should always talk about complexity and simplicity at the same time. They come in pairs. So why don't we talk about simplexity? And the simplexity here is you have a very simple rule and you iterate that. You apply it again and again to the result, and what you get is structures like these. So what you do across scales is zooming in and zooming out. And zooming, I first learned when I bought my first camera with a zoom lens many years ago. Here's me at 18 years old with the two lenses. And there was a zoom lens. And if you look down right, you can see exactly where I am right now. But you may have no clue where that is, except for Stefan, who lives quite near here. So to orient yourself, you have to zoom out. You have to include what was out of scope at this scale. And then you zoom out on Google Maps and you see, oh, yes, it's in the middle of Europe. Aha. Now you have nice orientation, but you're lacking all the details. So if you want to see the details, you have to zoom in again. You have to differentiate what was confused or diffused, to quote Matthias Varga from Tibet. So the one is orientation, zooming out, and the other one is giving focus, zooming in. And it includes solution focus, which is a very special kind of zooming in what is important for people. So one way of zooming in is done like that. And I hope you enjoy the quick succession here of pictures. This is from the time when I was still working as an expert for wound healing. So I was interested in molecules and cells and how does the body heal itself when it's been injured. So what you do is zoom in into ever more details. Look at the hand, look at the surface, look at the skin, look at the details of the skin, go inside the body and see the live cells, the leukocytes, the white blood cells that are important for wound healing. Then enter the cell and find the DNA in the cell and the molecules, etc. This is zooming in. And again, some kind of rough surfaces and holes, and then entering, and repetitive structures repeats. There's a fractal quality. If you put that to words, what you see is the live cells of the body, the fibroblasts and keratinocytes and whatnot. You can zoom in and look at the molecules. That's what we just did. And you find collagen and cytokines and hormones and DNA. You can zoom out and reach the level of organs, the immune system, etc. You reach the level of people if you zoom further out and you have patients and doctors and nurses, etc. Then you have organizations, hospitals, health insurance, or a whole society with its politics, economy, technology. And all those levels are important for a wound to heal. All are relevant contexts that you can zoom into to get more detail or zoom out of to get more overview. And then find out how each of those fractal self-similar structures influences on a wound to heal. Talking about solution focus in organizations, this is probably somewhere between organizations and people. This would be the fractal level of organizational development. Still, all persons have their organs and their cells. And if you have trouble with your organs, probably you're more focused on the organs and their solutions rather than on the organizations and their solutions. Just to give an impression of this apple-like structure, the Mandelbrot set, how far you can zoom in. A quick series here of that. Fractals. This is, you start at some level, then you zoom in. And you zoom in. And you see ever more detail. And you zoom in. And zoom in. And zoom in. And there's detail and beauty and no straight lines. And there, zooming in so many times, the Mandelbrot sticky apple shows up again. And you can zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. And you could continue. If you like to take a look at that at your own speed, you can go to this link afterwards and see. There you can zoom in any way you want. Okay, now, this is fractal geometry. This is beautiful images in 2D, and you can look at them. The same idea also applies to not seeing, but to listening. There is fractal structures in music unfolding across time. There was a drummer being recorded, and what people noticed is, as he was such a brilliant drummer, there's always these tiny variations. And when you analyze those mathematically, you realize they have the same thing, a fractal structure of things repeating. You can look at economics, and you can see economic cycles, long cycles like Kondratiev, and short cycles overlaid with the long cycles, and even shorter cycles overlaying with the short cycles. Again, this idea of fractals applies to economics or to psychotherapy. You can ask people for changes across time for different parameters, and then you can make complicated time scaling analysis, and what you get is even more complicated patterns. But what you can see in the colors here is sometimes something is hot in the conversation, sometimes it's cold, and you can learn a lot from change, from these graphics about change ahead, if you want to do it scientifically. And again, there is complexity in psychotherapy, and there is simplicity in psychotherapy, as well as there is fractal patterns in interaction, in relationships. Here so nicely illustrated by the book title of a German book about the geometry of the soul by Christian Schubert. He drew these fractal patterns, and probably you can see those faces at the end of those snail-like structures. So it's fractals and fractals, just a very quick excursion to how they are created. Mathematically, the graphics are, as I said, being created by repeating a simple mathematical equation, and it results in those not straight lines or squares. It's not one-dimensional or two-dimensional, but it's 1.5 dimensional or 2.7 dimensional. It's broken dimensions. And socially, You may have different perspectives, broken perspectives, diverse views on the world, and what happens is like you break up the light with a prism, and what you get is a rainbow. It's something that is self-similar and beautiful. And it helps in coaching and in therapy. In geometry, you take an equation like that and feed it back into itself. You iterate applying this, and what you get is this painting. In psychology, you might find the same pattern by people forming beliefs about the world from emotionally intense experiences. And then when they meet the world again, they apply what they perceive to the filter of the beliefs they already have. So the previous experience continues to shape the current perception and experience. And again, what you have is something like a fractal pattern across time, being shaped by the beliefs people create. And then they put it into their interaction, and then some structures emerge, like the Corfu thing that I will come back to in a couple of minutes, this model of mind that I first introduced in Vienna 19 years ago. So there's a longer text I do not want to read here. Just, you could read that in the presentation afterwards. It's just the idea that you find these, by zooming into relationships, by zooming in what your partner tells you, you can find like the core structures of their lives. And tiny exemplary situations can help you and them to better understand their lives. And if all works well, for the rest of their lives, maybe by changing their beliefs, or maybe by changing those equations that create the structures in their life. And it says, if we venture into psychotherapy with a fractal, geometrically trained perspective, connections emerge relatively quickly that would otherwise not have occurred, or not so quickly, except maybe by solution focus. So before I send you into breakout rooms for a brief conversation, I would love to bridge back to solution focus. So I mentioned I started with the fractals in Vienna, then showed you a couple of slides just to display the beauty, tried to hint at how fractals are being created in mathematics, in geometry, and in relationship. And the same idea can be applied to very well-known solution-focused tools, like solution-focused scaling. You all know that. If you have a scale, you know you have a couple of points between 0 and 10. 10 is the ideal, that is best hope fulfilled. You are somewhere now, as it is now. There's somewhere where it would be good enough, where you would like to be, your goal. And in between is room for improvement, a room of resources, everything that's okay already, that helps you, that increases your number of options, your actionability. And there is this sense-making room. Once you have reached good enough on the scale, what would that be good for? What makes it sensible? What makes it useful? What is the purpose of reaching good enough? And that's the points on the scale beyond good enough, between good enough and perfect, and ideal, the future perfect. And in between, you break down the room of improvement in steps of improvement. And the most important one is step number 1. Where do you start? And then you realize that when people talk about, well, if I got from 3 to 4, that would be nice, but unfortunately it's impossible. The step is too big. Then you zoom in and you scale down. So you say, well, if it's too big from 3 to 4, maybe how about going from 3. Oh, that's a typo, from 3.3 to 3.4. And if people say that's still big enough, you zoom in, you scale down and say, well, let's go from 3.03 to 3.04. The step size is not really important. Again, there's the scaling invariance. What is important is you're going in the direction that makes a difference for you, and that the step is small enough to be feasible, big enough to make a difference. You remember maybe Gregory Bateson's Information is a difference that makes a difference, big enough to make a difference, and small enough to be feasible. And it can be as tiny as it needs be. It's the same pattern across all scales now here in the double meaning of the word. If you zoom out from the scale, if you move back, you remember, then you see more context. For example, in my wishbone model, what you see if you zoom out from the scale, you see there is boundaries to your playground, your area where you can act. This is what I call restrictions, things that limit your degree of freedom and that you cannot easily overcome. This is not solutions focus anymore, because solutionists don't love to focus on things that do not work, but still restrictions apply to what works. Here's two kinds. One is limited resources. I only have that little time, that little money at hand, that little connections. And there is norms like laws and standard operating procedures and values and tribal etiquette that limit your range of options, how you can behave and how you are supposed not to behave. And where there is the least room between the restrictions, this is what I call the constraint. And there's a whole theory of constraints that I'm not going into today. And this is what also applies to between now and your next step. There is one element, one place in the whole network of interactions that limits your options the most. And that's an interesting point, because everything you try to work that doesn't change your limiting element, your constraint, might well be a waste of time. So it's very useful to have an eye on the constraint. What changes my throughput at the constraint in a desired direction so I can make progress? There's this American-British author, Nancy Klein, who puts the question about the constraint like this. She asks, what is your most limiting belief? What is your most limiting belief? And then she turns it around into a solution-focused way. She asks, and what would be the opposite? And suppose the opposite was possible, then what else would be possible? So in a solution-focused way, overcoming the constraint once you identified it. Another very nice version of asking this question is, what are you most unwilling to feel? Because many of our personal barriers are rather emotions rather than thoughts. What are you most unwilling to feel? For a variety of reasons. And once you identify that, you can add Steve DeShazer's brilliant 7-word turnaround, which says, given all that, what is still possible? Given all that you have limitations, restrictions, constraints, so what? What is still possible? Let's return with the attention towards what works, what is still possible. There's a Zen version of that too, which is called, this being so, so what? And I like this version as well. All right, I will stop here. If you want to learn more about that, you can look in Peter Senge's 5th Discipline field book about from data to beliefs, etc. I'll skip the details here, and I would love to move forward to a breakout small group work. Let me introduce the question I would like you to talk about briefly. If you remember your future perfect, what do you know between you and one scaling point higher up? What is currently keeping you from already being 1 point higher up? What could be an idea about that thing that I call a constraint? What is most limiting you from already being 1 scaling point higher up, or even being at your future perfect already, rather than where you are, if you are not at 10 on your scale? What might be your most limiting belief about the thing that you would like to see improve? Or you could ask, what are you unwilling to feel? You might notice you're even unwilling to name what you're unwilling to feel. Still, it might be a useful information. Which feelings do you routinely, or especially in this context, try to avoid? And feelings might include a fear of failure or defeat. It might include shame, previous experience of being shamed, fear of shame. It might include fear of missing out, FOMO. It might be simply the demand of too big a step size, which then might lead to failure or shaming. Like if somebody demanded of you, now please stop the climate crisis. This is just overwhelming. This is too big. Or whatever else. So when I now send you out to breakout rooms for a couple of minutes, then have these questions in mind. What is holding you back? What might be your constraint, your unwillingness to feel, and what ideas do you have about that? I will try to put the questions in the chat as well, or you take a screenshot, then you have it at hand. And then I will stop sharing the screen and try to send you out into breakout rooms. Let me check the time here. We should be at, oh, well, we're doing well. So I will stop the screen share here. And as we are 11 people, I would say let's take 4 breakout rooms. So if you remember the questions, it's about your future perfect. It's about what is keeping you from moving up, constraint or feeling, and enjoy the conversation. See you in 9 minutes. Welcome back. Nice to see you again, and I hope you had interesting conversations. Whatever you talked about, whether or not it was about solutions, future perfects, constraints, fears, unwanted feelings, lovely feelings, whatever else it was, I hope it was useful to you in any small way. We have 15 minutes left over, and I would like to pick up where we left the presentation with a few more slides. And before doing that, just before I forget, let me try and upload the slides to the chat already, so you can download that already now and don't have to wait for after the conference. I will upload that to the comment Dropbox, but here you go. It's uploading. Okay, you should be able to access now. And I will continue with the screen share. Okay, you were in the small group work and discovered some feelings or something else, starting with that graphic about the wishbone before. And it's one of those many things, structures, maps, and concepts where you could zoom in and find more detail. And there could long stories be told about all the details in this version of the wishbone structure. I will skip the details here, and I will just compress or combine this wishbone thing into a more simple structure. And before I do that, I just wanted to point out the blue thing, which is the path or the project plan, if you're thinking in a project world, this is delivering progress from step to step. And at each turn, you might say, this is where interaction happens. This is where Corfu happens. And I'll explain on the next slides what I mean by that. So if you collapse the whole detailed structure of this wishbone into something which looks like a Tai Chi sign, symbolizing simply any kind of open system. It has the many details of the wishbone, but we ignore those. We zoom out and we just compress that into this Tai Chi thing. Then you have any kind of open system. This can be a person, this can be a team, this can be a company, this can be a nation. They are all open systems. It could be a plant, an animal. And every open system from a systemic point of view, every living system has its own timeline. It comes from its past. It's moving towards its future. And somewhere along the way, it realizes I cannot do everything I need all by myself. I need somebody else, another person, another plant, another company to participate in my supply of nourishment, in my supply of money, if it's a person, in my surviving in the market, if that's a company. I need some other open system. So the other open system is along their own timeline, from their past to their future, and then they can start an interaction and become useful for each other. The one system delivers some product or money or attention or emotions. There's different currencies to exchange in return for the other party delivering something. So they start a mutually beneficial interaction or transaction. And whenever systems do that more than eventually one time, something happens. A next larger unit or system level emerges. Very simple example. Consider two people marrying, two single people entering the church or the city hall as singles. And after the ceremony, suddenly you have a third entity, which is the marriage. And it takes only 2 weeks until you notice that the first person is doing something not for the other person, but for the sake of the marriage. You have two people having a brilliant idea. They are founding a team. And then suddenly you have team dynamics influencing both formerly independent people. You have two teams organizing, becoming a larger organization. And then you have the larger organization that limits the degrees of freedom of the team. So suddenly you have a unit of three, the two and the first level, and the next, the larger system, the larger level. And now suddenly all three influence each other. And that's what happens in each coaching conversation. You have two people talking about something third that comprises them. And suddenly the larger system creates its own timeline, its own needs, its own beliefs, its own future perfect, its own past. So the two parties now seen as two wishbone structures suddenly create a common wishbone something with shared restrictions. And suddenly it's not so important what the individual person's limiting element is. Now, what is the limiting element of the larger system? And again, you can see this fractal idea of patterns repeating across orders of magnitude. Now the question changes to what is keeping us together from moving on? And what is our most limiting element in our joint world? What is the constraint in the common restrictions? Again, you could zoom into that Corfu structure and see a lot more detail, like with all those fractal structures. I'll skip all the details. You could translate every element on this map into coaching questions. Who is offering what to whom? What is the exchange rate? Is it money about product? Is this work for money? Is this work for love? Is this love for love? Is this attention? Is this listening as the coach to a person finally being allowed to talk as a coachee? What is the exchange? And if you know about your constraint in your own personal progress, who might be an ideal partner to deliver what you can't give yourself? And what would you have to offer to them? And would the bigger system allow the transaction, or would it forbid the transaction? Is it culturally appropriate to do that or not? So many questions could be generated from just this one map. Now, maybe after this presentation, I have a few more slides, but already now, and you have it in your presentation as well if you downloaded it. Maybe you'd like, after this presentation, to briefly come back to your personal future perfect. And maybe you found out something about your limiting belief. the feeling you're unwilling to feel, or whatever else the constraint might be on the way between you and the next step of improvement, between now and n+1. Now, thinking in core, you might wonder who could be a helpful partner for you to make progress despite the constraint. Who could you reach out to? Would that be your best friend, your dad, your child, your business partner, your boss, your intervision partner from the solution-focused community? Who would be a helpful partner? What would they have to offer, and what would you have to offer? What is the smallest thing that you could think of in this exchange, in this transaction? The smallest thing that might be helpful to you, and the smallest thing you might have to offer to the other person. And maybe it's just listening without an agenda, which is a precious gift. And maybe it's just having 2 words of appreciation, which is a precious gift, and which might start an ongoing transaction and a viable system of exchange, a relationship. And if you think about a partner, then what's the largest system that you co-create, that emerges from your transaction and that has to benefit too? Or the larger system you are already now being part of. If you think about a conversation with your dear colleague at work, how would the company benefit from you changing your way of interacting? How would your team benefit? If you think about having a conversation with your partner, how would your family benefit? The people outside the conversation, but still influenced by how you converse within the family. So maybe after the conversation, this might be worth a thought. Who could be a helpful partner? What is the smallest things to exchange to mutual benefit? And how does even the larger system benefit from such an exchange? One almost last picture from this fractal world. This is a fractal structure which is called Cantor's dust. And it helps in dusting off. If you imagine the thick line on the top representing a problem, what you do is, with solution-focused questions or other questions you found helpful, is you poke a hole into the line. So you see in the second line, there is 2 parts of the previous line and a hole in the middle. And again, like in all those fractal activities, you repeat, you iterate. Now you poke a hole in each of the remaining black bars. And you repeat, and you repeat, and you repeat. And after few repetitions, what you're being left of is basically dust. So poking holes into problematic situations by asking solution-focused questions creates this fractal, and then you can dust off the problematic situation and happily move on in the direction of your future perfect. So I hope for you that on your way you enjoy this fractal simplexity, fractal meaning repeating at all orders of magnitude. Even if you use the solution-focused scale, something repeats. And this simplexity, the inseparable combination of complexity and simplicity, the complexity of real world and the simplicity of the solutions we can find in conversations with well-meaning partners. So I hope after the presentation, you will stay curious, looking always at the next horizon on your personal life's fractal journeys. And if you have any comments, questions, nice cartoons, illustrations, or anything else, please feel free to drop me a message. As we have 3 minutes left here in this joint space, if we want to finish on time, or 2 minutes right now, I will stop the sharing. And if there's any quick comment from any of you, feel free to write it in the chat or just speak up before we call this a session.
Well, I have to say I learned 100% more of whatever a fractal is than I knew to start. And it was very interesting when you look and you take something from physics or math and then apply it into interpersonal relationships.
Yes. Thank you, Beverly.
So it's fun.
This is the power of pattern thinking. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. Kasia.
Klaus, I've just decorated my therapeutic office, my new office, and I've put the pictures of ferns and grass on the walls. So when I heard you, it was a sign.
Good. Now you know why. Thank you, Kasia. Any other comment?
Just quick, I think this zooming in and zooming out, I think this makes it lighter, so it's just this movement. It starts moving, something starts moving. It cannot be fixed. So because when you zoom in, you have movement. So you have a process, a progress.
Exactly.
No matter in which direction you go. So that's fantastic. I like it.
And your hand gesture simulates or indicates something like a dance.
Yeah.
So what was previously a problem now becomes a dance of solution, which is nice. Thank you. Yes. Any other comment here? Well, if not, then I will stop two things. Number one, I will stop the recording. And number two, I will stop talking and leave you to your precious 5 minutes breaks between now and the next session. Enjoy and stay curious.